All right, y'all, happy Tuesday. Thank you so much for being here with us. We have some amazing, powerful women, of course, for our Teal Talk Tuesday special. And oh my gosh, y'all, Women's History Month, it's coming literally to a close. Although we're going to continue to celebrate women, right? Every day, all day, and all women, right? So yeah, I'm Jessica Sanchez, oversee Relationship Violence and Sexual Assault Prevention Program and the LGBTQ plus program. I'll hand it off to my colleague.
I'm Casey, and I am the confidential advocate with the RVSP program, and excited to have y'all with us today. Thanks for joining us. I'll turn it over to Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Kelly, and I serve as the director of our Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life.
Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be here with you all. My name is Grisell, and I serve as assistant director within the Follett Student Leadership Center.
Awesome. We appreciate y'all so much. And y'all, I'm just going to go ahead and apologize now. Obviously, you see Kelly and Casey and Grisell have these amazing backgrounds. And you know, my background is usually always there, y'all, every Tuesday. But today, just technology is not working for me. And so I'm still here. And so I apologize, I'm not with my peers, but anyways, it's still gonna be great. So y'all, we invited Kelly and Grisell to essentially talk to us about imposter syndrome. You know, me and Kelly had actually had a really good conversation at one point in time that led up to this idea, and essentially just like, when did we know and learn about imposter syndrome, right? And like, being that we are all women and just working, you know, with a lot of young student leaders and a lot of women student leaders in general, kind of having like this discussion around, do they have the language necessarily? Because like I didn't have the language until undergrad, right? And mine was particularly a woman of color, my first woman of color professor that really provided me the language and what it meant to understand and navigate imposter syndrome. So Kelly, kudos to you for bringing this up and just starting this conversation overall, but that's what we're going to dive into more today. So with that, let's just kind of dive right in. And Kelly, you can start. Like, when did you know, kind of learn more about imposter syndrome? And let's just start with that, right? Like, beautiful baseline there. Like, when did imposter syndrome, when did you find the language to actually understand what imposter syndrome is?
Right. I think hearing the language, to be honest, is within the last 10 years of me working professionally in higher education and working with leadership programming and personal development of students is really when I heard the official term and had this moment of like, oh, okay, this is normal. And so honestly, it was about that time. It's been since I've been a professional that I learned the term, saw the term, was excited to hear some normalcy and taking it back of like, oh, I'm normal. And like other women experience, and certainly men too, but we're talking about women today. Other women experience this too. And there's just power in those words of realizing I'm not alone. And this is, I don't like the word normal because there's not a lot, you know, what is normal, but that these feelings are valid and it's okay that I'm feeling this way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Grisell, what about you?
You know, so it wasn't until my graduate program where I was taking a gender and sexuality within higher education course. And that was the topic of our class. And so in undergrad, I didn't have a whole lot of professors who identified as women, right? And so I was in the business school. And so I think that that's part of why I probably didn't have those conversations. But in that class, I remember my peers and I just kind of looking at each other. And for a lot of us, it was that aha moment of like, oh, there is a term for this, right? Because we'd all experienced it. And so being able to sit in that space with those people was really important and special. And we've been able to continue having the conversation all of these years. But again, it wasn't until graduate school that I learned about imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. And Casey, do you want to chime in and like share kind of your
Oh
experience?
yeah, I was gonna add on to that too. Absolutely. Mine wasn't till my grad school. It was in grad school. And I even felt like when I was in grad school for a master's in counseling specifically, and I was even curious as to, is this something that comes up because of my realm, like being counseling, and so we're talking about it, or is it something that professions, other degrees are also talking about because it's definitely not a silo into it only if you're in the mental health world. Like so many of us experience that and pretty regularly. So yeah, that's when I had learned about it, and definitely had a moment of, oh, like that's what that is. Okay.
Yeah. And so, I was going to first start like, let's lay the definition out there, right? But I wanted to start first, like, kind of with these already like common just descriptors that we have all shared as women on this call, right? And so, y'all, like the definition of imposter syndrome is a loosely defined as doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud almost, which that's a powerful word, y'all. Like, someone calling you a fraud or having to internalize that can be deep. It disproportionately affects high achieving people who find it difficult to accept their accomplishments, and many question whether they're deserving of essentially their successes, right? Meeting their goals, accolades coming their way, recognition pieces. And I think we could definitely keep adding to that. So now hopefully, students that are going to chime in, and even faculty and staff, right? Kind of that aha moment that we're all describing, where we're having these feels, and then finally people giving us that language to be like, oh, what you're describing is imposter syndrome. So yeah, for sure. Let's see, I think that kind of goes hand in hand. How do you navigate then? Obviously, just like with the definition, right? Grisell even talking, it sounds like very much, your academic career speaking to a lot of, possibly I would assume if we're on the binary, right? A lot of male professors, which could be intimidating for a woman. And we know students very much have this reality. So how are you navigating imposter syndrome?
Mm-hmm. And at that time, I wish that I could, go back and coach myself through that, right? But over the years, I've just learned to believe in myself, right? And so whether it is just having those moments of like, you know what, my experiences are valid, I matter in this space, right? And so just a lot of pep talks and having people in my corner rooting me, right? And so having some strong relationship with other people has helped me, right? And so being able to be transparent of like, I'm really nervous going into this, or I received this recognition and I was just doing my job, right? And so I've had amazing people in my life coach me and mentor me as well. So it's ongoing, right? And so I think that's really where I find myself now.
Absolutely. Kelli, what about you?
Right. I think about the time kind of preparing and gathering thoughts for today. The time when I have been the most confident is also when the imposter syndrome has probably been the strongest. I think about the time when I was selected for the position that I hold at the university now, and leaving my interview that day and feeling like I just knocked this out of the park, and like this joy of this day that I had on campus interviewing for this experience, and just feeling like, yeah, like I'm at this point in my career that I feel good and serving our students and really trying to challenge and support our students. But then once I was selected, the almost immediate flip of like, what the heck? Why did they choose me? Like, I'm not good enough for this. And like the fraud word definitely just kicks in of like, I'm not good enough. And I think for me, it definitely still comes up, our administrators, our directors sit in team meetings together with our vice president, our assistant vice president. And there are definitely moments that I sit on that call, or will now call, or even in the room, and have those moments still of like, am I good enough? Why was I chosen? Am I a fraud? Should someone else be sitting in this seat? And it is definitely a lot of self-talk, remembering that my colleagues chose me for this position. So they entrust in my ability and our students. And then a lot of, to Grisell's point, using those around me to even sometimes provide a pep talk and remind me that I'm doing my best, first of all. And that, as long as we are giving our best, and I need to take this step back and recognize my strengths and that I am here for a reason, is really what I bring it back to. And then a lot of self-care. And I know we'll get into that in a little bit.
That kind of brought up for me, Kelli, like I think about when applying for jobs and even when I read job descriptions, if I can't like check off every single thing, like if I don't have experience in every single line, and like sometimes job descriptions are pages. I mean, they're like a couple pages or, they're long. And it's like, if I'm like missing one thing, I'm like, I'm immediately not qualified. And then it took me reading like the statistic about men compared to women, how when a male reads a description, like I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's like they're like however much times more likely to apply for jobs that they are like not meeting the requirements. And I was like, why am I automatically writing myself off if I don't meet just one? And so once I saw that statistic, that validated for me, like I'm like, that's imposter syndrome kicking in for me of, oh, I can't do this because I've never done it before. And then it's like you think about all the things in your life that you have never done before and you still rise to the challenge and succeed. And so it's a lot of that self-talk of like, okay, I don't have this one thing, like I still am very much capable of doing this job or developing a program or a new idea. Like how often do we do that?
I think in the professional setting, I feel like is probably where I see it the most. Is that, like you said, that one thing, and even once you have the job, it sort of lingers of like, well, I didn't have that experience. Are they sure? Or you're always trying to kind of supplement, which can mean a lot of things. It might mean you're overly immersing yourself in it and learning and trying to be your best, but it's always just sort of weighing on your heart and your mind of like, I'm not enough or I'm not good enough. And so it's a challenge professionally is where I feel it and see it the most in my graduate degree as well.
I was just thinking about the graduate degree, right? Because I echo all of it with that job posting of, there's 50 things and you're like, that's one thing I don't have. But also, as people are looking to continue their education, and I know that I've fallen into that when I've at different points when I've been like, okay, I'm going to start looking at doctoral programs. And I'm like, I'm not going to get in. I don't have these experiences, right? And so having to tell myself like, it's okay that you don't have those experiences, right? Like, but you have all of these others. And so giving myself a pep talk. But I also, I see other people who didn't necessarily have direct experience in those things, and they are in those roles or they are in those doctoral programs. And I'm like, you know what? If they could be there, I certainly know that I can be there as well.
I feel like too, y'all, like I don't think it's segueing too far off, but like we just were talking last week, like as a country, I think it's the 24th. I'm pretty bad about this. I should know this right now. But just like the inequity that exists between the wage gap, just for men and women, like the fact that us right now on the call, all women, right? We share the statistic of like, we're getting paid less, point blank period, if another man was in our job, right? And then when we bring in the intersectionality piece of race and ethnicity, we know that the dollar then decreases significantly. And so I think that too, right? Like sometimes just when Casey brought up such a great point, because I think we're all like, yes, have the feels there with like looking at a job description. But then also like sometimes y'all like, that's like my motivation too, to be like, no, because if a man was getting this, and like, why am I doubting myself? And if I get this, I have to remember, like, if a man was offered this position, he's probably going to make more than me just naturally, like with the offer. So I feel like we're constantly like always reframing, which can also be exhausting too, like all the time.
That makes me think of the importance then of negotiating with your salary, right? And so if we're already having these doubts and that fraud piece is coming up, I'm not going to feel comfortable, requesting more money, even though I know that a male would be getting paid more than me, right? And so it is exhausting.
Yeah, that's so true. It's like, I know when I go to try to negotiate salary, or even when I've thought about it in the past, I know that there's that piece of like, well, I'm just going to be thankful if I get an offer. Like, do I want to push too hard? And it's like, but then you market and it's like, okay, if they're offering you less, like, well, I want the market, like compared and it still just feels like if I push too hard, then are they going to be like, just kidding, we're just going to revoke our offer, bye.
But also knowing that like a male applied for that position with not all of the boxes checked, received it, and then still negotiated for higher pay is when we remind ourselves like, yes, this is exactly why we're going to still apply, right? And negotiate once we get the offer.
For sure. I know we were talking about like how we navigate imposter syndrome too. I think for me, one of the ways that I try to help cognitively or just in my mind, like we've talked about like the self pep talks. Sometimes if I'm successful in something and I'm not giving myself credit, I'm like, if I was failing in this area, how hard would I be on myself right now? And trying to really look at that of like, okay, when I fail, I'm fully giving credit to myself. But when I succeed, am I fully giving credit to myself? Because if I'm going to do it failing, I might as well do it succeeding as well.
Yeah. So with that, I feel like, give us a little, it's going to be a little, practice of vulnerability here with our panelists, but, give us a little inside sneak peek of like, what does the self pep talk sound and what does it sound like? What does it feel like? Give us some pointers, right? Especially for the women that are going to be listening to this call.
Yeah, I know. I was watching. I was like, are you going first? Am I going first? It is definitely some talking to myself out loud and quietly, depending on environment and situation. Sometimes the bigger the challenge ahead, the more it's out loud. And to Casey's point, it's usually thinking about all the positives. How did I get here to whatever, whether it's professionally or like I mentioned, my doctorate degree is definitely something that I have let some imposter syndrome even create a roadblock for me. And so there's a lot of conversation with myself. And then even when the negative is coming up, squashing it, like immediately being like, no, this is who I am. I am also really big on the superwoman pose. So you will see me in my office by myself. Like if I need to walk out and go like have a difficult conversation or approach something that's difficult for me, I am standing there and breathing and I got this. And just breathing itself. Definitely learned that a few years ago in some training. And after that was like a changed woman. And Casey and Jessica, y'all probably learned that in your grad degrees. But it just definitely the breathing and pacing, it helps me a lot. And so that's really what it looks like is whole lot of this conversation and just physically sitting in my feelings and trying to focus and prepare.
I love that so much. I love the superwoman pose. Love. I'm going to be stealing that.
It's powerful. Like you end up feeling like superwoman. So for me, it is just reminding myself like you got this, right? And like literally saying that to myself, whether it is in my head or out loud. I also am a firm believer of just music, right? Like using music in a way. And so I put my favorite reggaeton song on, right? Because I could feel the beat literally. And I'll just have a few moments of just dancing, whether it's in my chair or physically just dancing and just get out all of those nerves, but always reminding myself, like, what's the worst that could happen? Like, okay, maybe I'm a little bit embarrassed, right? Maybe I say the wrong thing. I apologize and I do better, right? And so my mom always taught us like, you can't lose anything by just asking, right? You'll get a no's sometimes, right? But what if you get the yes? So what if you get the job? What if you get admitted into the program? What if you get the scholarship or the award? And so I try to reframe. And so kudos to my mom for teaching me that early on in life.
Love that. Love that. Jessica, what about you? How do you navigate it?
Well, I was, I don't know if it was Kelli or Grisell, probably, I think more Grisell, well, mixture of both with your responses, but like in my grad program, we, on the human sexuality side of my grad program, we labeled ourselves as like trap scholars. We're like, we can listen to like trap music, but we're also still academic scholars at the same time. So that like made me think of that with the music piece, because I'm sure we all have our choice of music, come rolling up to UTA, walk into the office and being like, yeah, I'm glad no one can hear right now, like this song that I'm playing, but also needed that, like needed to be able to scream that out or like rap my favorite lyrics and then hit the ground running for the day, right? Y'all, I think I would definitely give props to like my parents. I think about my parents a lot and just why I do what I do, right? My parents are high school educated. And so it was always ingrained, like, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor. And they're definitely a lot of inspiration, right? And just the motivation piece. I was talking to Casey the other day, we were talking kind of like feminism and essentially like just making sure we're empowering as many women as we can in the work that we do. And then we kind of were just like, who empowered us? Like, we have a lot of confidence naturally as women. And like, we just had a good conversation. I don't think we ever really kind of like figured out, of course, I want to attribute to my parents, but I also still just kind of reflect on my own, where did it come from? And I think I've just kind of naturally always believed in myself. I think we said that already earlier, right? Like, I can do this. Other people are doing it. There's been people already before me that have paved the way. And Kelli, definitely resonating with, I'm, getting my doctorate as well. And I had received feedback from my chair, who is a woman and a woman of color. And I was intentional about selecting who my chair was going to be. And the first time I got feedback, like, on one of my chapters, I was like, why is she like intentionally hurting my feelings so much? And it made me feel like I wasn't capable of being here, even though I was internalizing that she was, hurting my feelings, when really she was just academically critiquing and challenging me because she knows that I'm capable of producing quality work, So definitely in those moments, right, of being like, I'm already here. The program said yes to me. Again, reminding myself that there's people that have already done it before me, and just keeping that, confidence, and of course, a big self-care piece. Like we said, Kelli was like, we'll dive into that soon. So yeah. But Casey, what about you? Definitely want to make sure you talk to.
Oh, I was just gonna when you brought up trap scholars, I love that. I love that so much. I think especially like working in higher education now, I know when I was in my grad program, I think of, and even getting into grad school, I have this narrow vision of what it means to be in academia, or a narrow vision of what it means to move up and hold like a certain position title. It means like you wear a certain thing. It means that you read certain books. Like, what is that one that's like so pop? It's like the most effective, how to influence people or how to win friends. And then I don't know. It's like I even think of a certain bookshelf and I think of certain language that's used and language that is not okay to use. And I remember in grad school, though, I had a professor who didn't check all those boxes in my mind, just felt very authentic, felt very much like, I'm not going to put on, like, this isn't the language that we have to use. He was like, y'all are going to be counselors, but you're still going to be normal human beings with emotions. And, and that kind of helped debunk this idea of what it means to be in a certain position. And that was so helpful for me, even in saying like, okay, I don't have to do all these things. I can wear sweatpants and still have great ideas. I think we've learned that, especially with COVID. It's like we can all wear comfortable clothes and still produce amazing things. And so I think seeing those things get debunked and seeing like it doesn't have to be this narrow definition. Like there's so much beauty in having so many different ways that people present. And I have found that even in regards to interviewing. I think, I brought up the job descriptions earlier. I think imposter syndrome for me comes from that tendency to want to be a perfectionist. And I was just reading something the other day that said perfectionism is a tool of capitalism. And then obviously being in anti-oppression work, I was like, well, that's bad. And I think even reading that, it was like, it's not about being perfect. It's about presenting in an authentic way to find the best fits for yourself. And the more I've gotten that message in a variety of ways, that has helped me navigate it better over time. But it's still a constant process, a pep talk, self-soothing. So
Yeah, well, and I think that's so powerful, Casey, because like imposter syndrome has impacted me in a way where it's like, do I wear my hoops to an interview or do I not? Because is that too much? Like, am I screaming too much Latina in that moment? Or even like yesterday, I had an interview and I was like, I don't know if my ponytail is going to be too much. Like, imposter syndrome was getting just to my physical appearance yesterday. And what does that mean if I have a ponytail in an interview? The other person probably, and now that I'm talking about it out loud, I'm like, wow, I let it win yesterday, y'all. Like, and again, you're not going to have perfect days, right? Like, imposter syndrome will creep in and allow you to make decisions that maybe you wouldn't have done 48 hours later, right? Or 48 hours earlier prior to that. But yeah, I mean, like, it's just, and it can just impact you in so many different ways, like not just only mental, but like even physical, like, oh, is this too much? Or am I using my hands? Or like, y'all just saw me almost broke my neck. Like, even that, like making me be like, oh, I need to sit up straight and make sure like I'm in this role right now. So yeah, I was getting a lot of feels from what you were saying, Casey.
I feel you on the hair. I remember when I was coming to my interview for this current role, I played with that. Do I straighten my hair? Do I leave it curly? Right. And so I finally had that moment of like, you know what? If I don't get this job because I have curly hair, I don't want to work there. Right. And no one was thinking about it. Right. Once I got met with the committee and the students and everyone that I met with, like, no one cared. Right. But it was just internally all of those, little thoughts creeping in.
Yeah, I think about that a lot with just like norming and what is beautiful. I think that outward appearance plays in a lot as someone who's always been overweight and super body conscious. Whether kid, high school, now, that definitely creeps in a lot. And it's, to Grisell's point, it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not I can do my job. I'm able to do the physical limitations of our jobs, but just how we present and how I enter a space is definitely, that's on my mind. And Jessica, like you said, you can allow it to win sometimes. And so it's a balance, and you're just constantly thinking about all these and feeling all of these things.
I was, Kelli, kind of going off of what you were saying, I was thinking about too, because when I think of imposter syndrome, I do tend to think of like in the professional realm. And then when we've been having this conversation, it did come up with me just in terms of like a narrow definition of beauty standards and how that is even used to as like a tool of oppression, essentially, of, we spend more time thinking about appearances when we could be spending that time on other, because that's how we've been normalized, because we've had those media messages everywhere all the time of what's normal or not. And I think imposter syndrome can even come up, like someone says like, hey, you're beautiful, you look great, and it's like, oh, well, are they just saying that to, or like, and it's no, it's like they genuinely mean it, and then it's even an imposter syndrome in that way of like, oh, I don't know. It's like, yeah, I am. But it's wild how it still just creeps up for sure in so many different ways. And I had never thought about it in regards to beauty standards before just even starting to have this conversation. I was like, wait a second.
Yeah, for sure. So like with that, y'all, obviously there's a lot to impact with imposter syndrome, right? So tell us a little bit, like, how do you build your community, right? Like that support community. Essentially, who do you pick and choose? Like, who gets to share that energy with you too? I think that's really important. And I know personally, as I continue to mature into this wonderful adult, right? I've seen my circles get smaller from when I think of how many, just an undergrad, right? I had like all of these people, and it slowly continues to get smaller, but it's also just so much more empowering, the people that are around me. And so kind of tell us a little bit, how do you build your community?
I share that, where my circles have gotten smaller. And so for me, if I can't have an open and honest conversation and be myself, like my true authentic self, then that tells me a lot about that circle. And so over the years, I think just also just not being afraid to have some of those difficult conversations and like, hey, have you experienced this, or this thought or this feeling is coming up. And so that has been important in developing that, but then also looking up at people that I admire, colleagues, mentors, people in different positions. And so being able to foster some relationships there have been really important, at least on my end.
Yeah, I think pretty similarly. I think about friends that are knocking down walls and breaking glass ceilings that I just look to a lot for their strength, and even colleagues, whether they know it or not, all of you on this call, you know, just like the amazing work that I see other women doing, whether it's professionally supporting our students, or whether it's even in their personal lives. And then a counselor, a mental health professional is a part of my circle. And that's just, you know, that's really important to me. Sometimes that outside that's going to challenge me differently, and also keep me on track is what I need. And so that is definitely a part of my circle as I continue to reflect and grow.
I love that you shared that. Definitely my circle too. Counseling, I think, is so. I remember, you know, I went in the profession to be a counselor, and I had never had counseling before. And then I was like, well, I truly believe in this, so probably should do it. And I remember my first session, I didn't even think anything was going on, and I think I spent crying. And I was like, wait a second, I am really stressed. But I just think having that outside person, just that is, sometimes when we do think about friends or family members, you wonder, like, are they giving me an answer I want to hear? Even the people that you can have like the really honest conversations, sometimes kind of had that curiosity, but with a counselor, it's like just that outside person you can also debrief things with. So it's so helpful. And yeah, I am surrounded I'm constantly thankful that I'm surrounded by women who are like doing the work, breaking barriers, different mentors who are saying, like, you know, I'm reading that job description, like, don't hit those boxes, but yeah, no problem. And so definitely echo everything that y'all have said, but my circles have definitely gotten smaller over time too, because I think even just asking myself, who do I want to be within a relationship? And if I'm not as the person I want to be within a relationship, is that relationship worth my time? And if the answer is no, keep it moving. What about you, Jessica?
No, I was going to say, I think one of the most powerful stories too that I share with undergraduate women at UTA is how one of like me and my childhood friends of like, it was like 21, 22 years. You know, it came to a point where I had went to grad school, right? And my program was very challenging in an aspect of the type of therapy that I was wanting to specialize in with human sexuality. So they had told us on day one, like, look at yourself in the mirror and you're going to be a completely different person in 3 years. And that's true for any graduate program, any undergrad, any career experience, higher, you know, academic, across the board. But I was definitely, y'all, a completely different woman, right? And I had that moment, Casey, of like, what am I putting energy into? What is the energy that I'm getting back? Who is matching me in my relationships and matching what I'm bringing to the table? And I ended up like ending that friendship. And it was, while it was hard in the moment, it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. And I think, especially as women, sometimes we get stuck in like that notion that, oh, you have to do this and you have to do that and you have to keep that going because of whatever, you know, the reason behind it, right? And so that was definitely, and I share that a lot just to let women know, like, you deserve like whatever energy you want in your circle. It is sacred. Your energy is sacred. And if someone is not matching that or respecting your boundaries, like, it is time to take a step back and just, you know, discuss it in therapy if you have a therapist, or, you know, and just really evaluate, right? Like, what is this relationship? What is this person doing? And if they're not no longer serving you in the way that you need that, fulfillment, or it's not healthy, not respectful, then it's time to, probably cut it off, right? It ended up being one of the best decisions I ever made. So I share that just to let women know, like, you have the right to do that. And it doesn't matter whether it's a friendship, a family member, it's all across the board, all relationships that you occupy. With that, y'all, like, we've discussed some heavy stuff today. Tell us about your self-care routine. What does it look like? I'm also curious to know how much you're implementing self-care. I think it's easy for us to be like, oh yeah, I do this and this and this, but then when we don't follow up with, but by the way, I only do it once every 3 months, or I'm only doing it once a month. Weird, kind of where, someone's, again, like, no, you need it way more. Like, we need that consistency. So what are you doing for self-care, and how much are you actually implementing or able to implement, right?
I'll miss this once we're like back in person of the like, who's gonna unmute. So for me, I've gone through a recent big transition in my personal life, right? And I had a daughter 7 months ago. And so as a new mommy, self-care looks a little bit different for me. And I'll be honest, I'm trying to figure out kind of that balance. And so in making sure that it's often enough where I'm not feeling that burnout, right? But where is it manageable? So for me, a couple things that I do is a shower. While it is a necessity, there are different types of showers, right, or baths that one could take. And so just having the door shut, locked, so no one interrupts, right, where I can't hear the crying or any of that, putting music on, and that truly just being an opportunity for me to do a body scan, even while I'm washing my hair, right, just like some mindfulness, and that has been really important. For me, exercise has always been a big one as well. And so getting back into the swing of that, hopefully soon, because I feel it not only like physically, but also that mental release that I'm able to get out of it. And so I'm also a firm believer that self-care isn't just like bubble baths and this, that, the other. Sometimes it's having those difficult conversations with people in our lives, or making smart financial decisions. So I really want those shoes. People that know me know that I'm obsessed with shoes. I don't need those shoes, right? It's like that, also that pep talk of like, no, don't spend the money. And so making sure that I'm setting up myself for success and taking away some of the stressors has also been important. And then flowers, I like to have flowers in my space. And so I used to bring in a bouquet into the office every single week, and put it where I could easily see it. And so when we went into quarantine, it came into my home office, right? And so picking bright colors as well to just brighten up the space. And so if I'm stressed, or if I even need a couple moments, I could just stare off at the flowers and know that that will kind of charge my batteries up a little bit.
So I think self-care has meant a lot of similar pieces of even the flowers. And I remember before we left, like Grisell always having flowers in her office. So when we kind of went home, it became a good way to be, like you said, be present and just have this beauty. Exercise as well. Again, counseling becomes my self-care and my like check-in, and doing my homework and working towards that continual self-care. My dog, I can physically feel it when I hang out with him. He's very tiny. I was going to say hug him, because you do, because he's this tiny. He's a huge part of that. And then a lot of times, like task, if I can do something creative, like a puzzle or something, it is a huge release for me. Now I say all of this and will be completely authentic that since COVID, like routine has been really terrible, really hard for me. And so self-care has not been great. Exercise for a little bit, then I take a 3-week break. And so it's just definitely the impact of COVID it's been difficult. Our jobs don't stop, our personal lives don't stop, and we have this additional trauma that we have with the pandemic and all of the spotlight on racial injustices. They certainly have always existed, but are getting a lot more mediation and conversations, and it just kind of thrown me a loop. So sometimes it's just getting through the day and going to the next one and trying to figure out what is a second of self-care today? What could that